I have her in three different census records. I have her in a Norwegian Lutheran Church membership book from 1888. I have a photograph labeled in faded pencil Astrid Solberg, Minnesota, 1905. She's real. She existed. She lived, she married, she had children. She grew old in Goodhue County, Minnesota. And when I typed her name into Norway's National Digital Archive, the system returned zero results. Not one, not close, zero. Here's the thing, that wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a data gap. It wasn't even a search error on my part. The truth is far stranger and far more interesting than any of that. Astrid Solberg never existed in Norwegian records. Not because she wasn't born there, but because in Norway, that was never her name. How do you find someone who, according to their home country records, simply was not? That is exactly what we're doing today. Let's dive in. Welcome to Ancestors and Algorithms, where family history meets artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Brian, and today we're heading to Norway. Now, whether or not you have Scandinavian ancestry, I want you to stay with me here. Because what we're working through today is one of the most common sources of complete research paralysis I see in the genealogy community. You have an ancestor who immigrated from a country with a completely different naming system. You search under the name you know. You get nothing. You assume the records don't exist. And the line goes cold. But the records are there. The ancestor is there. You just need to know how to look. And today we're going to use 4 AI tools to crack open a Norwegian family mystery that starts with a woman who seemingly vanished from the homeland she was born in. By the end of this episode, you'll have a workflow you can take directly into your own Scandinavian research. So let's get started. Let me paint you a picture. Her name, in every American record I can find, is Astrid Solberg. Later, after her marriage, she appears as Astrid Halverson. She was born in Norway around 1862, according to the 1900 federal census for Goodhue County, Minnesota. The same census lists her husband as Ole Halverson, also born in Norway, occupation listed as farmer. Their oldest child was born in 1889, which gives us a general timeline for when they arrived in America and started their life together. The 1910 census tells the same story. Astrid Halverson, age 48, born Norway, naturalized. Ole Halverson, farmer, 4 children. By now they've been in Minnesota for over 20 years. And then there's the church record. A Norwegian Lutheran congregation in Goodhue County kept a membership book, and on a page dated 1888, 2 names appear side by side. Ole O. Halverson and Astrid Halverson received into membership. The O in Ole's middle initial is interesting. We'll come back to that. Finally, Astrid's death certificate lists her birthplace as Telemark. That's a region in south central Norway, and it's actually one of the most helpful pieces of information we have because Norway is not a small country for genealogical purposes. Knowing she came from Telemark narrows our search considerably. So I have her in America. I know approximately when she arrived, where she settled, who she married, and roughly which corner of Norway she came from. By the standards of a lot of research I've done, this is a solid starting point. And then I typed Astrid Solberg into Digitalarkivet and got nothing. Digitalarkivet is Norway's national digital archive run by the National Archives of Norway. It's free, it's publicly accessible, and it contains millions of scanned and searchable historical records. If Astrid Solberg was born in Norway in 1862, her birth and baptism should be in a Norwegian parish register. So I searched, and the system returned 0 hits. Now, here's the moment I want you to sit with. Because this is the moment most people quit. They assume the records weren't digitized, or the records were destroyed, or maybe their family story about Norway was wrong, and they closed the browser. But none of those things were true for Astrid. The records exist, they're digitized, they're searchable. The problem is something else entirely, something that stops American researchers cold every single time they try to work backwards into Scandinavian genealogy. Norway, until 1923, did not use hereditary surnames, not the way we understand them in America. Let me explain what that actually means because this is the key that unlocks everything today. In 19th century Norway, most people's names had three components. The first name was your given name, something like Astrid. The second was patronymic, which is a name built from your father's first name. If your father's name was Magnus and you were his daughter, your patronymic would be Magnus' daughter, daughter of Magnus. If you were a son, it would be Magnus' son, son of Magnus. The third component was a farm name. In Norway, most families lived on named farms called goder. You'd be known by the name of the farm where you lived. If you lived on the Solberg farm, you'd be identified as being from Solberg. But here's the critical part. That farm name was an address, not a surname. If your family moved to a different farm, you took the new farm's name. It changed with you. So Astrid, born in 1862 with a father named Magnus, living on a farm called Solberg, would appear in Norwegian church records as Astrid Magnus' daughter. The Solberg portion might be recorded as an address or a locating detail, but it wasn't her name in the way we think of names today. When she arrived in Minnesota, she simplified. She kept the farm name Solberg as a fixed surname because that's how Americans understood names. She became Astrid Solberg, and later Astrid Halverson when she married Ole. Here's where things get genuinely interesting. Her husband Ole in Norwegian records would not have been Ole Halverson either. He would have been Ole Halvorsen, son of Halvor, which means his father's name was Halvor. And that middle initial in the church membership book, Ole O. Halverson, that O almost certainly stands for Olson, his patronymic, because his father was also named Ole. Two generations of naming convention compressed into a single middle initial in a Minnesota church ledger. This is exactly the moment when AI becomes not just helpful, but genuinely essential. No single researcher can intuitively carry the naming convention of dozens of countries in their head. And the solution isn't to guess. The solution is to research before you search, to understand the system before you try to navigate it. AI is your research assistant, not your researcher. And today, that distinction makes all the difference. Because before I go back to Digitalarkivet and search effectively, I need to understand exactly what I'm looking for. And that's where we're starting. The first tool I reached for was Perplexity, because what I needed was current, cited, accurate web research on Norwegian naming conventions and what records are actually available in Digitalarkivet for the Telemark region. Perplexity is my go-to for this kind of foundational research question, the ones where I need reliable information from multiple sources with citations I can verify. It pulls from the actual web, synthesizes what it finds, and tells me where it got that information. For understanding a foreign archive system, that's exactly what I need. Here's the exact prompt I used. Quote, research the Norwegian patronymic naming system as it was used before the 1923 Names Act. Specifically, 1. How would a woman born in 1862 in Telemark, Norway be recorded in church records if her father's name was Magnus? 2. How would that same name appear in Norwegian immigration records from the 1880s? 3. In Digitalarkivet.no, if I'm searching for this woman who immigrated to Minnesota around 1886 and is known in America as Astrid Solberg, what search strategy should I use given that her Norwegian name would be different? 4. What census and church records does Digitalarkivet have for Telemark County from the 1860s through 1880s? Please cite your sources, end quote. Let me walk you through what each piece of that prompt is doing because the structure matters. The 4 numbered questions are doing specific jobs. Question 1 establishes the naming format and the record type I most need to search. Question 2 asks about immigration records separately because those records were kept differently from parish registers. Question 3 is where I'm actually asking for a search strategy, not just background information. And question 4 is the practical inventory check. What's actually in Digitalarkivet before I go looking? The citation request at the end is non-negotiable for me with any web research tool. I want sources I can follow. What Perplexity returned confirmed and extended what I already suspected. A woman born in 1862 with a father named Magnus would appear in the Norwegian parish registers, the Kirkenbøker, as Astrid Magnusdottir. That's her recorded name, full stop. The farm name Solberg would appear as a locating detail, sometimes written alongside the name to identify which Astrid Magnusdottir was meant in a community that might have several. It might appear as Astrid Magnusdottir Solberg in the ledger, or it might simply note the farm as an address column. But it was the patronymic Magnusdottir that was her actual identifying name. Immigration records from the 1880s work similarly. The Avgangslister, which are the departure lists kept by Norwegian parishes, record people by given name and patronymic along with their home parish. Port-based immigration records, organized by the major departure ports like Kristiansand, which is now Oslo, also list names by given name and patronymic, not by the farm-derived surname she later used in America. For the search strategy, Perplexity laid it out clearly. Don't search by surname at all. Search by first name plus approximate birth year, filter to the Telemark County, and then cross-reference what comes up against what you know about her father's name and the farm. The inventory check came back strong. Digitalarkivet has the 1865 and 1875 Norwegian censuses for Telemark, both fully searchable by given name. It has the Telemark Kirkebøker digitized and browsable, with many entries indexed. It has immigration records from multiple Telemark parishes. The records exist. The strategy just had to change. This is the single most important lesson in international genealogy research, and it's the one that trips people up at step 1. Before you search, understand the system. And Perplexity just handed me the system. Okay, armed with that, let me go back to Digitalarkivet. I pulled up the 1865 census for Telemark. I searched for the given name Astrid, birth year range 1860 to 1865, county Telemark. And within 30 seconds, I had results. The most promising hits stopped me in my tracks. A household on the Solberg farm in Kviteseid parish, Telemark. The head of household was Magnus Olson Solberg. His daughter, listed below him, Astrid Magnusdottir. Age 3 in 1865, birth year 1862. Her father was Magnus. She lived on the Solberg farm. She was born in 1862 in Telemark. This matched everything I knew about Astrid from the Minnesota records, and I'd found her in under a minute once I understood how to look. Now, here's where things get interesting and a little complicated. Okay, I have a strong candidate in Kviteseid parish, Astrid Magnusdottir, born 1862, daughter of Magnus, on the Solberg farm. It lines up beautifully with everything I know from the Minnesota side. But I also found a second candidate. In the 1875 Norwegian census for the broader Telemark region, there are two women named Astrid daughter who could fit the bill, both born in the early 1860s. The first is my Kviteseid candidate, now 13 years old, still on the Solberg farm with her family. Consistent. The second is in a neighboring parish called Nissedal, and she also appears connected to a Solberg farm location, though her father's name is less clearly legible in the 1875 record image. Two Astrid daughters, both in Telemark, both possibly connected to a Solberg farm, both born in the early 1860s. Now I have a problem. And the problem is that I can't resolve it with web searches alone. I need to get into the actual handwritten records and read them carefully. This is where Gemini 3 comes in. The 1875 Nissedal census entry is handwritten in Old Norwegian script, and the scan quality is workable but not clean. There's a smudged area over the father's given name column, and several entries are written in a compact, abbreviated hand that's genuinely difficult to read without help. I could spend an hour squinting at this, or I could spend about 2 minutes with the right AI tool. Gemini 3, accessed through Google AI Studio at aistudio.google.com, is the current leader in handwriting transcription for genealogy work. As of December 2025, when Gemini 3 launched, it achieves a character error rate of 1.67% on historical handwritten documents. To put that into plain terms, for every 200 characters, letters, spaces, and punctuation, Gemini makes fewer than 2 mistakes. That's expert human transcriptionist territory. And it's free through Google AI Studio. You'll want to use Gemini 3 for the best transcription results on old or tricky handwriting. Here's the exact prompt I used. Quote, "This is a page from the Norwegian census of 1875 from a Telemark parish. Please transcribe all text in this image exactly as written, preserving original spelling, including Norwegian characters. Instructions. Keep the column structure of the table as closely as possible using spacing or pipe characters. For any illegible word or character, write illegible in bracket. Do not translate. Transcribe in the original Norwegian only. Preserve original abbreviation as written. For the column that appears to list given names and patronymics, transcribe each entry separately. After the transcription, list any words you found difficult to read and why." End quote. The column structure instruction is important here. Census pages are tables. If Gemini just runs everything together, you lose the relationship between the data in different columns. Keeping the structure means you can actually read who belongs to what household. The list difficult words request at the end is something I always include for historical document transcription. It tells me where to double check against the original image myself. Gemini is very good, but on proper nouns, especially Norwegian farm names, it will sometimes make a reasonable guess that turns out to be slightly off. I want to know where those guesses are. What came back confirms something important. The father's name in Nissedal entry, the smudge column, was not Magnus at all. The transcription showed Knut with moderate confidence, with a note that the ink had run and the first letter was partially obscured. Gemini flagged it as a difficult read. That's my dead end. And honestly, it's the best possible kind of dead end, because it eliminates one candidate and sharpens the focus. If the Nissedal Astrid's father was Knut, she was Astrid Knut's daughter, not Astrid Magnus' daughter. She's not my ancestor. Let me verify that, because this is where the golden rule matters most. AI is your research assistant, not your researcher. I went back to the scan myself and zoomed in on that column. And yes, what I'd initially read as a possible M in the damaged area is, on close inspection, more consistent with KN. Gemini's read was right. One candidate, Kviteseid parish, Astrid Magnus' daughter, born 1862, daughter of Magnus Olson, Solberg Farm. Now, I need to take the next step because identifying her in Norway doesn't automatically connect her to the Minnesota woman. I need to build the evidentiary bridge, and that means bringing in Claude. Here's what I uploaded to Claude. The 1865 Kviteseid census entry showing Astrid Magnus' daughter, the 1875 Kviteseid census entry showing the same family, the 1900 Minnesota federal census listing Astrid Halverson, born Norway, 1862, the 1910 Minnesota federal census with the same information, and the 1888 Norwegian Lutheran Church membership record listing Ole Halverson and Astrid Halverson received. I gave Claude 5 documents, and here's why Claude is the right tool for this part. Claude is not doing web research. Claude is doing what it does best, finding patterns, flagging inconsistencies, and building a structured analysis from the materials in front of it. Here's the exact prompt. Quote, I'm researching a Norwegian woman named Astrid Magnus' daughter, born 1862 in Kviteseid parish, Telemark, Norway, who I believe immigrated to Minnesota and became known as Astrid Halverson. I've uploaded 5 documents. 1. 1865 Norwegian census, Astrid Magnus' daughter, Solberg Farm, Kviteseid, born 1862, father Magnus Olson. 2. 1875 Norwegian census, same family, Kviteseid, Astrid, now age 13. 3. 1900 Minnesota federal census, Astrid Halverson, born Norway, 1862, husband Ole Halverson, Goodhue County, Minnesota. 4. 1910 Minnesota federal census, same couple, older. 5. 1888 Norwegian Lutheran Church membership record, Ole Halverson and Astrid Halverson received. Based only on these documents, please 1. Create a comparison table showing what each document tells us about Astrid and about Ole. 2. Identify any piece of evidence that connects or fails to connect the Norwegian Astrid to the Minnesota Astrid. 3. Flag any inconsistencies between the documents. 4. Based on what is present in these documents, what single additional Norwegian record would be most useful for confirming this identification? End quote. The based only on these documents instruction is critical, and I want to dwell on that for a moment. This is the Notebook LM principle applied inside Claude. I don't want Claude drawing on general training data about Norwegian immigration patterns or making inferential leaps based on what it knows about the era. I want it analyzing what I've given it and only that. The reason is that if Claude starts blending in general knowledge, I can't cite it. I can only cite documents. The comparison table Claude returned was genuinely useful. The age consistency column was clean. Astrid, born 1862 in Norway, Astrid in Minnesota, age 38 in 1900, which means born approximately 1862. Consistent. The geographic column, Telemark, Norway. Death certificate said Telemark. Consistent. The naming column, Magnus' daughter, farm name Solberg. She adopts Solberg as surname in America. Logical and consistent with known Norwegian immigration patterns. The Ole column is where it got interesting. In the Minnesota records, Ole Halverson. In the church membership record, Ole O. Halverson. Claude flagged the middle initial. If Ole's patronymic was Olson, that gives us his father's name, Ole. And it suggests we should be looking in the Norwegian records for an Ole Olson Halverson in the Kviteseid area, born approximately 1858 to 1862, based on Ole's apparent age in the 1900 census. Claude's answer to question 4 was direct. The most useful additional record would be the Kviteseid Kirkebøker immigration notation. In Norway, pastors often recorded when parishioners left for America in the parish register itself in a section called Afganglister. If Astrid Magnus' daughter's departure was recorded in the Kviteseid Kirkebøker in the mid-1880s, that would directly link the Norwegian Astrid to the Minnesota timeline. That was my next search. And it's where things got genuinely exciting and then genuinely frustrating in the best possible genealogical way. I pulled up the Kviteseid Kirkeberker on Digitalarkivet and started browsing the pages from 1884 to 1888. The handwriting is Old Norwegian cursive, compact, and not easily read without help. I took screenshots of the relevant pages and ran them through Gemini 3 again using the same transcription prompt as before. The immigration section of the Kviteseid Parish Register for 1886 lists 17 names. Gemini transcribed all of them with high confidence, flagging only 2 as difficult reads due to ink bleeding. Going through the list, I found 2 entries that caught my attention. One was a Magnus Olson Solberg, which is Astrid's father, and just below it, an A. Magnus daughter Solberg. The initial A female given name, Magnus daughter Solberg Farm. That is almost certainly her, but almost certainly is doing a lot of the work in that sentence. The initial A could theoretically be Anna, Anne, or Adrine, all common Norwegian women's names of the era. Without the full first name, I can't confirm with certainty. And the fact that Magnus himself is also on the list means the whole family may have immigrated together, which is historically consistent with Norwegian chain migration patterns. But it also means there could be multiple family member records on this page, some of which I may be conflating. Let me give you a little more context here, because understanding why this kind of partial record exists actually helps you know where to look next. The 1880s were the peak of what historians call the second great wave of Norwegian immigration. Between 1880 and 1893, more than 18,000 Norwegians left for America every single year. To put that in perspective, Norway's total population at the time was around 2 million people. 1 in 9 Norwegians immigrated during this era. Per capita, that immigration rate was second only to Ireland. The upper Midwest, particularly Minnesota and Wisconsin, received the majority of them. Norwegian pastors were recording these departures in their parish registers because these were their parishioners. A person left for America the same way they left for the next village over. The pastor noted it. But the consistency of that notation varied by parish and by individual pastor. Some priests wrote full names. Some wrote initials when a family immigrated together because the household was obvious from context. Some focused their notation on the head of household and abbreviated or omitted other family members. What this means practically is that the immigration list I'm looking at was written by one pastor in one parish on one day in 1886, and his notation habits are his own. The A. Magnus daughter Solberg entry is consistent with how he abbreviated in other entries on the same page. Gemini flagged 2 other entries with similar initial plus patronymic formatting, both for households where a family group immigrated together. This is a real pattern in Norwegian parish records, not a data gap. It's a record-keeping style. The way to resolve an initial is to find corroborating information elsewhere. An arrival record in America that names the home parish, a later Norwegian-American newspaper notice, a letter home. The Kviteseid Bygdebok, if it covers the farm and this family, would definitely confirm whether Magnus Olson Solberg had a daughter named Astrid who immigrated to America. The Bygdebok is essentially a local genealogy and history book for that specific community, compiled from all available records. If it exists for Kviteseid and it covers the Solberg farm, it would name every family member and note major life events, including immigration. The Norwegian-American Genealogical Center in Madison, Wisconsin, holds one of the largest physical collections of Bygdebokers in the United States. The University of North Dakota's Chester Fritz Library also holds an extensive collection. Neither collection is fully digitized, but both institutions respond to research inquiries and can make photocopies of relevant pages. That is the specific next step for this research. Exactly where to look and exactly why. This is where I had to stop, take a breath, and bring in the fourth tool. I loaded everything into Notebook LM, and I want to explain why I'm using Notebook LM at this stage rather than continuing with Claude. Notebook LM is built around a principle that's critical for professional genealogy. It only answers from the sources you've uploaded. It doesn't pull from the web. It doesn't blend in general knowledge. When I ask Notebook LM a question about my research, it draws exclusively from the documents I've placed in my notebook. This is the source-grounded analysis model, and for building a GPS-compliant case, it's invaluable. I uploaded everything. The Kviteseid census entries from 1865 and 1875, the Gemini transcriptions of the Kirkebook immigration list, the Claude comparison table, the Minnesota census records, the church membership entry. 9 documents total, well within Notebook LM's free tier limit of 50 sources per notebook. Here's the exact prompt. Quote, based only on the documents in this notebook, please answer these questions. 1. What is the strongest chain of evidence connecting Astrid Halverson of Goodhue County, Minnesota, born Norway 1862, to Astrid Magnus, daughter of the Solberg farm, Kviteseid parish, Telemark, Norway? 2. What specific gaps remain in that chain of evidence that would need to be filled to meet a professional genealogical standard of proof? 3. Is there any information in these documents about Ole Halverson's Norwegian origins that could either support or contradict the Kviteseid identification? For each answer, please cite which specific document in the notebook supports your statement, end quote. Notebook LM's response was exactly what I needed at this point. Not because it gave me the answer, but because it showed me exactly how far I'd gotten and precisely what was still missing. The chain of evidence, working only from the uploaded documents, the birth year is 1862 in both the Norwegian and Minnesota records. The Telemark birthplace on the death certificate matching the Telemark location of the Kviteseid records. The farm name Solberg appearing in both the Norwegian census entries and as Astrid's American surname. The immigration list entry for A. Magnusdotter Solberg in the Kviteseid Kirkebook dated 1886, consistent with the Minnesota timeline. The father Magnus Olson Solberg also appearing on the same immigration list. Every link in that chain is present in the documents. The gaps were equally clearly identified. Notebook LM noted 3. First, the immigration list entry uses only an initial, not the full given name Astrid. Without the full name, the identification remains probable, not certain. Second, there is no document in the notebook that directly records Astrid's arrival in America or names her home parish as Kviteseid upon arrival. Third, the documents contain no Norwegian record of Ole Halverson at all, only his American records and the Minnesota church entry. If his Norwegian origins could be confirmed in or near Kviteseid, that would significantly strengthen the identification through proximity of origin. That third gap was the one that sent me back to Digitalarkivet one more time. I'm going to be honest with you about where this landed. And I know some of you are nodding right now because you've been exactly here. What I have is a compelling case. The evidence lines up across multiple records from 2 countries across a span of nearly 40 years of life documentation. The birth year, the region, the naming pattern, the immigration timing, the farm name, the father's immigration on the same list, all of it coheres. But compelling is not proven, not by genealogical proof standard. What this case needs to be proven is one of 3 things. A complete first name in the immigration entry, ideally Astrid Magnusdotter rather than A. Magnusdotter, or an arrival record in America that names Kviteseid as her home parish, or a Norwegian record of Ole Halverson from the Kviteseid area that places him and Astrid in the same community before immigration, which would effectively confirm both of them as the right people. Here's what I found when I did one more search. In the 1875 Kviteseid census, I went back with fresh eyes after Notebook LM identified the Oli gap. And there, 3 households down from the Solberg farm entry, is a listing for an Ole Olson Halverson, born 1858, son of Ole Halverson Fjeld, age 17, living on the Fjeld farm, 1 farm over from the Solberg farm. A young man named Ole, father named Ole, which matches the O in the Minnesota church record. Born 1858, which puts him at about 30 in the 1900 census, consistent with the Minnesota record. 1 farm over from Astrid's family in 1875. I can't tell you with certainty that this is the Ole who grew up to marry Astrid in Minnesota, but I can tell you that the evidence is pointing very hard at Kviteseid parish and at 2 young people who grew up on neighboring farms, immigrated in the same year, and built a life together in Goodhue County, Minnesota. This is the honest partial answer, not the ending I was looking for when I started, but a real answer built on real evidence with real guidance for where to look next. That's not a failure. That's genealogy. Now here's your homework. Go to digitalarkivet.no. It's free, no registration required. Find a Scandinavian ancestor whose American name you know. Then do this. Drop the surname entirely. Search only by given name and approximate birth year, filtered to the county or region you suspect. See what comes back. You may have been 1 naming system lesson away from finding someone you thought was lost. The partial answer we ended with is itself a GPS-compliant conclusion. It states what the evidence supports, identifies what remains unproven, and maps the specific next steps. That's not a brick wall. That's a soundly reasoned conclusion about the state of the research. And now for our friends in Australia and the United Kingdom, because the techniques we covered today translate directly. For Australian researchers working on Scandinavian immigrant lines, I'd point you first to the National Library of Australia's Trove, trove.nla.gov.au, which includes Norwegian and Swedish language newspapers from Australian communities that can name a migrant's home parish. The National Archives of Australia, naa.gov.au, holds passenger arrival records from the late 19th century, and for many Scandinavian arrivals, the home parish is listed. For UK researchers, Find My Past, findmypast.co.uk has Norwegian immigration indexes that bridge the Atlantic gap. And Scotland's People, scotlandspeople.gov.uk, while focused on Scottish records, has excellent guidance that applies directly to the understand the naming system before you search principle we use today. And for anyone, anywhere tracing Scandinavian roots, the Norwegian-American Genealogical Center in Madison, Wisconsin, NAGC, holds one of the largest collections of bygdebøker in the United States. Bygdebøker are Norwegian local history and farm books that trace families on specific farms across generations, sometimes back to the 1500s. The NAGC can help you access them even from across the world. Thank you so much for listening to Ancestors and Algorithms. If today's episode helped you look at a cold Scandinavian line differently, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you know a fellow genealogist who's been staring at a blank screen on Digitalarkivet, share this episode with them. That's the best way to help our community grow. If you want to go deeper, the companion guide for this episode goes considerably further. I've built out 12 advanced prompts covering things like using Perplexity to research specific Norwegian parishes, prompting Gemini to handle multiple pages of Gothic script church records at once, and a full multi-step workflow for tracing the patronymic to surname shift across both Norwegian and American records. There's also a GPS research checklist tailored specifically to Scandinavian immigrant research. It's waiting for Patreon members on our Patreon community page. And if you've been thinking about joining as a member, I host monthly live Q&A sessions on YouTube exclusively for members, where we work through real research problems together. But everything you heard today gives you a complete working foundation to start right now. I'm your host, Brian, and I will see you next week for another journey into the past powered by the future. Until then, happy researching.